Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1990 horror remake, Night of the Living Dead. Now, Night of the Living Dead to me personally is honestly one of the more underrated zombie films, and definitely one of the more underrated remakes. When it came out, it underperformed in the box office, it didn't get great reviews, and honestly, from a lot of horror fans at the time, it was not really a film that got that much praise, but over the years, it's got a cult following, and I think it's very much deserved. This is one of those films that, despite its issues, which it does have some, for one, you could definitely tell that this is a lower budgeted film. I know it's a movie that costs like 4 million, but there are times where it doesn't even look like it cost that much at all. I mean, this is for the most part a golden production, and you know about their tendency to cut corners. Also, this is around the time where the MPA was absolutely ruling Hollywood with an iron fist, and especially wasn't allowing horror films to really get away with that much when it comes to violence. So the film is considerably toned down and watered down when it comes to a lot of the gore. So that takes away a good chunk of the visceralness of the movie, I have to be honest. But I still think it's a really solid, exciting, and fun film to watch. It really is. And I think as a whole, it's more satisfying to me personally than the original Night of the Living Dead. And that's a hill that I'm willing to die on. Uh it's directed by Tom Savini, who wasn't actually the original choice to direct this. In fact, it was Peter Hyams apparently. And I think that would have been interesting. Would have definitely been intrigued by that film, by seeing this remake with Peter Hyams doing it. I think it could have had the potential to be even better, to be honest, with Hyams behind the camera, because he's a much more established veteran filmmaker. He's not really going through his growing pains like Tom Savini was throughout the production. Also, I feel he would have put his foot down more, and I think he would have been able to have a little more creative freedom than Tom did, because of the fact that he's an established filmmaker and he's not going to be pushed around by Golan or anything like that, because it's not like he has to please Golan in order to continue to maybe have a career. So it's not one of those instances. Hyams could just be like, nope, I like this idea. I'm going with this. If you have a problem with it, you can find a different director. He has that confidence in himself that I honestly don't feel Tom had when he did this movie, which is why he was kind of a pushover when it comes to Golan and the producers. Sad to say. I mean, he said that only about 40% of his ideal vision of this movie was ever realized, and part of that is due to the fact that the Golan company who were financing this, I think it was 21st Century Pictures, they they weren't gonna budge on certain shots or certain things when it comes to the production. Even though they were initially seemingly going into it with an open mind and allowing Tom creative freedom, they would pull it away from him. And I think just didn't really want to get into a fight, so he just kind of went with the flow and went with and took the punches and rolled with it, and hope that if the film was a success financially and critically, then maybe that would lead to him having a new door opened up for him in the industry. And sadly, that's really not what happened. And it would have been equally as fascinating to me to have seen what Tom Savini's initial, like, full realized version of this movie would be without the Golan uh company interfering so much, or with the benefit of a budget that wasn't shrinking, or the lack of the MPA deciding to put their nose in the film's business and just cut the film to shreds. But at the same time, what Savini brings to the table is kind of a mixed bag at times. Like, it's not terrible, it's not an awful job. I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be, but there's definitely room for improvement here. There are some shots that are a bit wonky looking. There are some sequences that just don't necessarily have the right atmosphere and mood. There's also a few scenes where I think it could have been a little bit more exciting when it comes to the way that the camera is utilized, but it just lacks that extra gear. Um, but it's still a decent job, well done by Savini considering the circumstances. He still has some nice looking shots here and there, has a good variety of angles and different techniques that he employs here. Um, and when it comes to like the makeup effects, I mean, that is definitely the biggest highlight. I mean, when it comes to the scenes that are dealing with the zombies and the zombie makeup, those scenes are very well shot, and understandably so, because Savini is just an expert when it comes to makeup effects. So he definitely knows how they should be lit and how they should be showcased. Um, but yeah, I don't think that Savini did a bad enough job that he really was essentially not given another chance like this again. But I could see why some people were not blown away by his job here compared to some of the other first time directors who had directed films in the horror genre. I mean, for instance, I think Chris Walas did a much better job in The Fly 2, which came out a year before this. Um, and he was a makeup effects artist turned director. And Stan Winston with his direction in Pumpkinhead. So there are a couple other makeup effects artists who got an opportunity to direct a film that I think were a little bit more impressive in terms of what they showcased. But at the same time, I think they didn't necessarily have the same limitations that Tom had to work with. So who knows what they might have done if they were in his shoes. Also, they didn't have his big shoes to fill. Like Stan Winston was doing Pumpkinhead, like that's an original film. It's not a remake of what is considered to be one of the best films in the genre by many people. And the same thing goes for The Fly too. Yeah, it's a sequel to the Fly remake, but the expectations were still not the same for Chris Walas. The script is by George A. Romero, and he even mentioned that he really wasn't able to do a lot of extra work on this script because of, prior obligations and things that he was trying to do. In fact, I think I read something where Romero was actually initially interested in doing the film himself, but there were problems with scheduling and he was working on other things, so he didn't have the time. But he did write the script, and you could definitely tell that a good chunk of this script is copy and paste from his script in the original Night of the Living Dead, but there's some significant changes that I honestly feel improve upon the original. And one of them is definitely the way that Barbara is written. Barbara is no longer a catatonic mute for the majority of the film who's just crippled by shock. She is a tough badass. She initially shows a lot of fear. She's initially frazzled, but she snaps out of it, gets a gun, and kicks some zombie ass. And whether that's realistic or not does not matter to me. This is just a much more engaging portrayal of this character. I also like the way that Ben is written here. I think the scene at the end when you see him as a zombie and they wind up having to take him out is very tragic and heartbreaking, and honestly a lot more effective than the way that they handled his character in the original Night of the Living Dead. Uh, I just think the character of Ben, as much as I did like the performance by Dwayne Jones in the first movie, I just think the character of Ben here is just a better written character as well. I also even feel that Mr. Cooper is a better written character here. Um, there's less derivative moments with him in terms of lines of dialogue about his conflict with Ben. I also feel that the way that things are structured with a lot of the other supporting characters is also an improvement. For instance, when it comes to Tom, his character and Judy, um, I think those characters are a lot better than they were in the original. I even think the character of Johnny, it's handled better, especially when it comes to the scene where he's attacked by the zombie. Like, there's more to that scene that really makes you understand why Barbara is initially really freaked out by what she saw. And while there are a fair amount of copy and paste moments, like the stuff with the family, with the Cooper family and their daughter in the basement, and a few other moments here and there, like the line where Ben tells Cooper, "I'm the boss up here, you're the boss down there." Uh, and like the ending of the movie where it has the snapshots, just like the ending of the original film. For the most part, is trying to be its own film. It's trying to be its own story, even though it's copying a lot of the same similar beats as the original, and it does copy and paste a fair amount of elements. There are still enough changes to different characters and the way they interact with each other, or the way that they interact with the zombies, or just the way that they are written as a whole, that make it into a script that still feels fresh. It doesn't feel like it's just stale old flesh. It's just the same old decrepit, decaying flesh from 1968, but with just a new coat of paint. Like, I don't really feel that really was the case with this remake. Even the ending, where Cooper, he's the reason why Ben is turned into a zombie, and you have an ending that is shocking in a different way, where Barbara is just like had it up to here with everything. She lost Ben because Cooper's a selfish asshole, and she just shoots him in the head and says, "One more for the fire." You're like, "Oh, okay, that's different." And you know what? I think it works. It works in its own way. Like, it definitely does make you think. It's like, okay, she did take things a little too far there, but at the same time, you're like, you kind of understand why. And in a situation like this, I mean, is she gonna get in trouble for it? No, she's not gonna get in trouble for it. She basically got away with murder. And it makes the character of Barbara even more interesting when you think about it. It's like, okay, this whole ordeal has changed her so much. Not only has it made her stronger, more resilient, showcased a side of her that maybe she didn't even realize she had, but it also brought out a dark side. And there are some other things that were maybe considered for the script that ultimately were dropped that I found kind of interesting. Savini had an idea where there'd be like a shooting star at some point in the movie, probably earlier in the film, and that would have been a callback to the explanation of the zombie outbreak in the original, where it was some kind of thing relating to space. But ultimately, I think it was Romero who's like, maybe it would be a better idea to just keep it mysterious. And Savini was like, yeah, okay, I'll go with that. Less questions. And there's also some other sort of things that I think Savini had in mind, but yet again, just couldn't do them because of the budget, or just was not allowed to take that kind of risk or that chance because of the producers at the 21st Century Film Corporation. Um, the film features, in my opinion, a really good cast. I mean, it's headlined by Tony Todd as Ben, and as much as I do like Dwayne Jones's performance in the original Night of the Living Dead, I think Tony Todd's performance in this surpasses what Dwayne Jones brought to the screen in that movie. I think Tony Todd is just terrific in this. This is honestly one of his best performances. I think it's honestly up there with his performance in Candyman. I think it's that good. The different nuances, the different layers that he adds to it. The character is a man who is believably strong when he needs to be, but also shows vulnerability and moments where he's broken down to almost nothing, and moments where he really does show that all of this apocalypse and just everything he's going through is really getting to him. And Todd had to just provide so many different aspects to this character, and it was not an easy performance to pull off by any means, because you had all these different things that he had to do with Ben. You had to have the moments where he's strong and he's effective in scenes where he's fending for himself or protecting Barbara or other people. Had to have the moments where he's standing his ground and standing up for what he believes in. And then you had them have the moments where he breaks down and he's emotional and he's distraught and he's upset at everything that's happening and is just struggling to wrap his head around what is essentially more than likely the end of the world. And then you have the scenes where he has to be a zombie and has to show emotion and has to show this tragic inherent sadness without even saying a word. So yeah, it's a terrific performance by Tony Todd, and I think Patricia Tallman is every bit as tremendous as Tony was in this as Barbara. Like, I really thought this was a special, just really great performance by Patricia Tallman. She also showed different layers when it comes to her performance, and in a similar fashion to what Tony Todd did. The characters are kind of similar in a lot of ways, but in reverse, where Tony already showed from the get go that he's a tough guy and he can hold his own, but then there are scenes where he's vulnerable. Uh, and Barbara at the start, she's more vulnerable. She's more prone to breaking down and panicking and just being flighty and so on. But then as the film goes on, her character becomes stronger and becomes closer to what Tony Todd's character was at the start of the movie. And I like that progression. And I think Tallman did a great job showing both sides of Barbara as a character, and was believable when it comes to all of these different facets of Barbara uh, as a person. When it comes to just the chaos that she's thrown into at the beginning of this film. Tom Towles was a vile character in this. Like, you really hated this character's guts. You did not like Cooper, but in a way where you love to hate him because Tom Towles did such a great job playing this character. Like, you hated this guy, you hated his guts, you wanted to see Ben or Barbara just smack him around or feed him the zombies, but you liked seeing Tom perform and play this just despicable, vile, selfish son of a bitch. Uh, McKee Anderson, she was fine too as Helen. I wouldn't say she was anything stupendous or amazing, but she was decent enough. I felt the same way about William Butler as Tom and Katie Finneran as Judy. Uh, Capable. William Butler had some moments where his acting was a little but uh, for the most part, I thought that they were good enough. Still better than the two actors in the original who played Tom and Judy, if you ask me. Especially Katie Finneran. And Bill Mosely was a blast. He was so much fun to watch as Johnny in the beginning of the movie. You could tell that he was having a really good time with that role. Heather Mazur, she was in it as Sarah Cooper. I think this is her debut. She's fine. She plays the girl, the daughter of the Coopers, who doesn't really have any lines of dialogue, but was pretty creepy when she was a zombie. I'll give her that. You had Russell Streiner, who played Johnny in the original movie. He actually has a cameo as a sheriff in this, which is a fun little a bit of casting. But really, it's Tony Todd and Patricia Tallman's film, if you really think about it. Maybe with Tom Towles. Yeah, those three are the ones that do the heavy lifting, and they do a really nice job. They really did, and the film has some decent enough looking cinematography by Frank Perenzi for what the film is trying to do. A lot of it looks very dark and kind of dingy. I know Tom had an idea which I think was brilliant, and it's really a shame that he wasn't able to do it. That the film would start out in black and white and then it would slowly add color as the film went on. I think that would have been really cool. But it's probably another thing that the Golan company, 21st Century Film Corporation, was like, no, we can't do that. That'll cost too much. Which is a shame because that would have been really cool. It'd be kind of a Sin City sort of thing before Sin City came out. I think it would have worked with Night of the Living Dead. The editing by Tom Dubensky, the editing is very inconsistent to me. Like there are some times where the editing is really sharp, but then there's other times where it's anything but, and it kind of detracts from the film really living up to its full potential at times. There are certain scenes that just look a little too choppy. They look like they got munched. And I feel that maybe a better editor could have cleaned that up a little bit, but at the same time, maybe it's not the editor's fault. Maybe it's just a case of, hey, these were scenes that were shot a certain way, but they had to cut it because of the MPAA, because it got an X rating initially, because there was more blood during certain scenes and there was a little more violence. And the MPAA was really a stickler at this time. So they had to cut out a lot. So that could also be a contributing factor as to why the editing looks like, a zombie bit the edges at times. But still, I mean, yeah, you had to cut some stuff out, but I mean, there are ways to work around that I think could be a bit better. Um, the film goes by at a pretty quick pace as well. Like it's not a slow shambling affair by any means. I think it's actually relatively fast paced and exciting, and fun to watch. And really, the only major issue I think that I really have with the film is there are some moments where I think it copies the original too much when it comes to some lines of dialogue or some certain elements of the script. And I do feel that the lack of blood, gore is definitely something that does hurt this movie. You can tell that's kind of that's really what Savini was trying to do. Maybe have something like Day of the Dead, but it's not a Living Dead. It's a remake, and just go balls to the wall and go crazy with it. But he just was not allowed to do that. and that's a real shame. Um, but I still feel that the make effects when they are there are still really good. I think they're great. I think there are still some moments when it comes to these zombies where they're still genuinely kind of scary and intimidating. And I feel that they aren't necessarily as hokey looking as some of the other zombies were, like in the original, for instance, or some of the other zombie films that came after it. Um, and there was some creativity for sure, like the zombie that's like a guy whose head is on backwards, stuff like that. The film featured a score by Frank Perenzi. I mean, no, cinematography was by Frank Perenzi, but it featured a score by Paul McCulloch. And the score, I almost forgot to mention it for a reason, because it's better to me than the stock music that they use in the original Night of the Living Dead, but that's not saying much because that's a very low bar. The score at times has its moments. There are moments where it adds to a scene, makes things a little more frenzied, makes things a little bit more tense. But there's other times where it's just kind of in the background. It doesn't really stand out that much. And I feel maybe a better score definitely would have helped this film be even more efficient and even more satisfying. Um, would have given the audience even more to chew on when it comes to this movie. But it's not, the score's not a net negative or anything. And overall, I legitimately would recommend this. If you're a fan of zombie films, if you're a fan of 80s horror, because this is a film that was made in 89 but then released in 1990. Like, this is technically a 90s horror film, but it was released so early in the decade that it really had more of an 80s feel and flavor to it. So I feel that that's more of its DNA. That's more of the blood that's in its veins than 90s horror. So I think it's a good companion piece to something like Return of the Living Dead. Except it's definitely a lot less campy and comedic. Although there are a few moments. Um, yeah, I think it's a gem. I legitimately do. I think this is a gem, and I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as some people make it out to be, especially some horror purists out there. And definitely one of my favorite zombie films. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of the 1990 Night of the Living Dead remake. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.